In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee.
Good evening. Welcome to In Session. I'm your host, Dr. Farid Holakouee, and I'll be with you for the next hour here on Radio Hamra. Tonight, I wanted to talk about the topic of decision making. And the motivation for the topic was actually my own experience recently trying to make some decisions and being quite disappointed with myself or the way I handled um, those decisions or what went into those decisions and some of the results. But I'll talk about how sometimes we want to be careful how much we emphasize or focus on the results. But um, kind of giving a general overview of what I went through, but then I'll get into the topic. I was trying to make some decisions about something I was unsure about, which of course makes it more difficult. Should I do something or not? And it came up a few times in a short amount of time. And basically, what I felt, I recognized I was doing, especially after the fact, even during, but especially after, was going back and forth so much to the point where the decision was almost out of my hands. So waiting so long that now it's too late to make a decision, which feels like you're not making a decision, or might feel like a lot of different things, but you're still making a decision because so as we think, okay, I have two choices, but there's also, until you make those choices, you're deciding not to choose yet. That itself is a type of decision or is a decision. So not acting is a decision as well, even though it might not feel like it, could feel like you're still waiting or still deliberating, doing your due diligence, all of those things. But we have to be aware that when you have not acted yet or made a decision yet, that itself is a type of decision. And often we lean on that as a comfort because it could feel easier than actively making a choice or going forward with a certain option. So I found myself doing that, kind of passively letting the situation go by until I couldn't make the decision anymore, couldn't take action anymore, I should say. So that's that there's a difference between choosing not to do something and waiting till it's too late to do something. So now you can't do it anyway, and those are two different things. So, making decisions is obviously a very, very big part of life. We're constantly doing them. Most of them are relatively inconsequential or smaller types of decisions that we have to constantly make, even, what you do from moment to moment, what you have for breakfast, what time you wake up, get out of bed, what do you do, all those things. Those are constantly decisions that we make. And a lot of them we make on autopilot, or we have routines or habits, which are actually quite good for us. Although sometimes just be careful not to lean too heavily on those because we might miss the opportunities where if some flexibility or trying something new would be good for us. But a lot of the decisions that we make, you can say we're not really making decisions so much as, we maybe made the decision beforehand, or we made it so many times beforehand that we, continue just making the same one. And it could be good every so often to evaluate that. Okay, I have these habits, these routines, these tendencies. Are they serving me? Are they not? How could I possibly grow or do better? Or, what changes might I want to make? But even on top of that, we are constantly having to make decisions. Even, a lot of decisions we can feel like the situation is presented to us. For example, someone asks us, hey, do you want to go to dinner tonight? And you feel like, okay, I have to make this decision. But what can also be more hidden, but it's really always also there, is a lot of the decisions that we can choose to make, choose to take some new action. So it's not like someone's asking us or it's very clearly presented to us, but we might have an opportunity that if we don't act on, we can lose. We can try something new or different. And it won't be asked of us, but we might have to ask ourselves or look at things in a particular way. So, as is always the case, I think it's good for us to not look for a one size fits all approach, or there's no correct way to make every decision. What's also very important is to recognize that we're all different in the ways that we make decisions. How certain are you versus how uncertain are you? how easy is it for you to connect and then trust your gut feeling, your instinct, or whatever is coming up for you, or how much do you tend to doubt that and be unsure of yourself? And then related to that, how much do you seek outside support or counsel, or even to the extreme, outside decision making? Sometimes people come to others to, they say, hey, what do you want to get some advice from you? But really what they want is for someone to tell them what to do because they're so afraid of making the wrong decision or a bad decision that they don't want to choose. They'd rather someone else do it. And so, just giving a few different aspects of how we each are as decision makers. But I hope you will reflect then on talking. If you're listening live, maybe it's different. Even if you're listening after the fact on, let's say, the podcast, maybe you could pause and reflect on what kind of a decision maker do you think you are. Do you think decisions are easy for you, hard for you? Sometimes in certain aspects of life, it might be easier, where other aspects might be hard. So someone might say in my professional life, it's easy, than in my personal life, it's hard, or vice versa. Often we're the same in lots of areas of life, but it won't always be the case. Are you someone that needs advice before you make a decision, or do you feel pretty good and settled making a decision on your own? Are you someone that is very afraid of being wrong, and because of that, it's hard for you to make a decision? Or do you have less of that and are okay and have room to allow yourself to make mistakes, which actually can be very, very important? How hard are you on yourself if you get it wrong? That's also a big one, because if you are really going to beat yourself up if you do something wrong, or even worse, you might say, "Oh, I'm stupid," or "I was an idiot," or "I'm dumb," or whatever else you might say to yourself. That can make it very scary to make a decision, because now you have to make a decision. You don't trust yourself, and then on top of that, you feel very scared of getting it wrong because of the self punishment, and maybe even extra level the self punishment that you will inflict on yourself. That's going to make it very hard to make a good decision. And by good, I mean even good to yourself, that what's best for you or what's right for you. That also can be different. So I hope you will think about that. How good, bad are you at making decisions? I should also say, as much as I'm talking about how bad the doubt can be and how hard you are on yourself and all that, which is true, some people are overly certain about their decisions. And even if there's really good, credible external feedback that they can get or advice, they might not seek it, or they might do something that's probably wrong, but still think it's right, and be so defensive that they won't evaluate their decision making with openness of, okay, maybe I didn't make the best decision there, or I could have approached that differently. So, as is always the case, the extremes are usually unhealthy. So if you're too uncertain and too doubtful of yourself, that's definitely problematic. But if you're overly certain, that can be problematic as well. If you're not really looking at what you're doing, looking at what else you could do better, seeing how your decisions might impact other people, all those kinds of things can be at play. So I hope you will pause a bit and reflect, because as I said, there's no perfect way to be a decision maker. There's no one way or right way, and people are very different in how they are. And if you want to go a step further, I would encourage you to try to look back at your childhood and big experiences in your life to see how the people around you influenced or affected who you are as a decision maker. Because often you had parents who they could do lots of things. One is they might not give you space to make decisions, so they'll be very controlling and intervening and making decisions for you. And that obviously doesn't help. This is a big thing we see, and I think most communities, but definitely in the Iranian community, we often have very controlling parents, or coming from anxiety. One of the ways that we respond and react to anxiety is control, or we're trying to get control. And also, when we don't have a tolerance for pain or discomfort, we could feel like we need to intervene very quickly, immediately, get involved to change things or prevent things from happening, because we're too afraid of letting our child, our loved one, suffer and be in pain in any kind of way, or even discomfort. So we think, well, I have to do something, and they're little and defenseless and can't do, and they need support, or they don't know what to do, so I have to do it for them. So I've seen this with so many young adults who come in for therapy, who have had their parents making so many of the decisions for them all throughout their life, telling them exactly what to do. And unfortunately, this created this comfort zone both ways. The parents feel comfortable, controlling the kid, and the kid is going to do what they tell them to do, and so they feel good about the decisions they're making, and the child doesn't have to think and deal with the pressure of making decisions and consequences to an extent, and so they feel comfortable too. But it's a very bad comfort that they're having, and so I see a lot of young adults who are now faced with the really, really huge questions of life. What type of career should I take or pursue? Who should I date or marry? Or should I get married? Should I have kids? Maybe where should I live? Or just all these kind of big life decisions. And they feel very ill equipped to make those decisions, really just frozen when it comes to making those decisions because they have not made any decisions in their life. So multiple things happen when you as a parent keep making decisions for your kids. And you might think it's coming from love. I'm protecting them. How could I let them just make mistakes or get hurt when I know what's better? We hear all those kinds of things, but we have to consider the situation is more complicated than, if someone's not telling their kid what to do is because they don't care or they don't love their child. They are trying to help their child develop in a more full way. And that includes bumps and bruises, but that's how you get stronger and how you develop your own resilience and sense of self. So when you make decisions for your child constantly and tell them what they do, what they should do, what they shouldn't do, and all of that from A to Z in their whole life, a few things are going on. One is really directly, but at least indirectly, you're telling the child you don't know what to do. And that's a really big one because you're telling them, I'm telling you what to do because I can't leave you to make this decision on your own because you don't know what to do. You're, not smart enough, stupid, whatever it is. There's, maybe multiple ways it's going to get communicated or it's more unspoken. But whatever it is, it's becoming very clear that they're saying you can't make the right decisions on your own. And that's a really big one that gets ingrained that I need someone to tell me what to do because I don't know what to do. So here's one reason why, yes, you can say, I know what's better and I see my child's about to do something hurtful and I can prevent that. So I should intervene. But you should recognize that you're giving them the message that they won't be able to figure it out on their own. They can't make their own good and right decisions. So you're giving them the sense of lack of belief. Also related to that, you're giving them a lack of experience. So they don't get the experience of thinking about the options, reflecting, maybe even seeking advice. So they might ask you for some advice or feedback or guidance at some level, or friends or other people, weighing the options, checking in with themselves, so important. And that we start to lose that if we don't let someone make their own decisions. And then let them go through that whole process and come to a place to make their own decision, which itself has lots of value going through that process of making the decision. And then seeing how things play out, what are the consequences of their decision, and then learning from that. Okay, I made this decision and it turned out bad. And I realized I was maybe thinking too much about myself or not enough about this or not whatever it is. There's so many complexities to it. But we are robbing them of these experiences of just going through the process of making decisions, making them for ourselves and by ourselves, and then living with the consequences of those decisions and then having to respond to that and then to make more decisions and more choices. So this is one of my lessons that I've talked about before, that when you give advice, as we think about what you're giving, I'm giving you something, a gift of advice, but we don't often think about what we're also taking when we give advice, because you might give advice, guidance, your thoughts, but we have to be aware that if we share it, especially in a very strong way, as a parent, let's say, tell your kid what to do, you might think I'm just giving them advice, but you're giving advice while you're also taking their agency, taking their possibility or opportunity to think for themselves, reflect, and come to their own decision and conclusion, and then to move forward that decision and live with the consequences. So we might think that advice means I'm giving you something, but we always have to be aware that we also are taking something as well, taking many things when we give advice. So as I was saying, this is unfortunately what happens often when we now put a young adult trying to make the big decisions in life when they have no experience making decisions and have been told in direct and indirect ways that they don't know how to make decisions. We can understand how scary it might be to now make the big decisions of life when you feel so inexperienced and unprepared and told you don't know how to do it. So unfortunately, maybe you had some of that experience in your own life, and if you did, understandably, it might affect how you are as a decision maker going forward in your life. Now let's go to a commercial break, and I'll continue on some of these themes related to making decisions, focusing on process, not just results, even though the results do matter, and some other topics related to that. So let's go to our first commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Talking tonight about decision making, and the last effect, at the end of the last segment, I was talking about reflecting on yourself as a decision maker. How easy, hard is it for you? Reflecting a bit on different aspects of it, and then also looking at your childhood and how um, you were treated as a decision maker. Making decisions was either encouraged, discouraged. Were you allowed to make them? Were you told you were good at them or not so good at that? And how that might impact you. And just a note on that as a parent, and myself as a parent, but on parenting now, it is, I know, a lot easier said than done to let your children make mistakes or have a difficult time with things or make decisions, even if you think or even in your mind, that they're wrong. I get how hard that is. Keon isn't obviously making big life decisions yet, but he's constantly playing, trying new things, experimenting with things, trying things with his body, now that he's getting bigger and can walk. And of course, there's this desire or this the fear comes in of wanting to just do something to protect him constantly from pains or things that might hurt him in certain ways. And of course, with lots of them, we should. But there's also a lot of space where you can allow a child to try things, and yes, they might get hurt, hopefully in mild ways, and ways that are temporary and not too bad. But you have to allow them to get hurt and to go through those processes first, just physically, but as they get older and making decisions in different ways from let's say their school and schoolwork, friends, all sorts of things, just letting them uh, fall, even if they, that happens, because we want to let them learn how to stand on their own. I guess that's a way of putting it. You have to let someone fall if they're ever to learn to stand on their own. So if you don't let them fall, maybe they don't ever hit the ground, but they won't learn how to stand on their own, which is really critical. And I think as a parent, as is with anything we do in our life, it's to think, what is my intention? Because, and what are my values, or the values I'm bringing into this endeavor? Because whether you're aware of them or not, there's something there. There's something driving what you do. And so for many parents, it could be just, don't let my kid get hurt. Protect your kid in every way, which I think is part of being a parent, but it's something that the whole thing. And so that's the whole thing, or the main thing you're doing as a parent, is just making sure your kid doesn't get hurt. You might protect them, but you also prevent them from living life and growing and developing. So we have to think about, what is it I'm doing here? Yes, I want to protect the child. And this is what's tough, I think, about life, is usually it's not just one thing we have to do or one value, that is the only important one. There's usually many important ones, and some maybe will even conflict or feel at ends with each other or at odds with each other. We have to find a way to balance them all, because you have to, yes, absolutely protect your child, especially from anything very severe. But you also have to make sure you don't prevent them from growing and learning and having experiences and trying things that are new, trying things that are difficult, trying things that are a little bit risky. You have to also allow them to do that in order for them to grow and become strong and become resilient. And one of the hardest things about being a parent is that, unlike other things that you love your children in a way that you want them to be able to go away from you, or have the ability to go away from you and to not need you. So usually we love something, we want to just get it closer and closer and closer forever if we can. But with our kids, we have to recognize, yes, we want to be very close with them, but we have to help them to grow away from us if they need to, or grow away from us as they get older, and to have the ability, the capability, the strength, resilience, and all the good characters we want them to have to be able to do that. So we have to do that as well. So, as parents, we have to also allow our kids to learn how to be confident uh, and competent decision makers, meaning we have to let them think about things. Yes, they can mull it over with us, but we want to be careful not to push them too hard. No, I think you should do this, or what do you think about that? Even if we're trying to make it like a discussion, but really allow for them to explore. They can bounce some ideas off us and then make sure they are making their decision for themselves. And then now, after the fact, yes, you're there to talk to them again, and hopefully you never told them what to do, so you can't even say I told you so if they got hurt. But even if they did get hurt, okay, you're there to help them. Well, what do you think happened? What do you think of your decision now? What do you think you did right, wrong, all that kind of stuff, to help them learn how to make the best decisions for themselves over time. And this is something that also comes up in therapy. People will come in and there's also some misconceptions that, okay, the therapist is going to tell you what to do. You know, you go to the therapist, say everything, and they say, oh, you should break up, or you shouldn't break up, or you should leave your job, or you should move, or you should whatever it is. And really, almost all of therapy won't include that, and for good reason. But same thing as with raising a child. If as a therapist, client comes in, I just tell them what to do. Oh, you should break up. You should do this. Oh, you should do that. Tell your boss that. Everything. Giving them all these, each week making decisions for them or telling them exactly what they should do. I mean, there's a few issues there. To begin with, even like who knows I'm right. So it's like the idea that the expert's going to know. I mean, how do you know? How can any person know all decisions someone else should make? So I mean, that itself is a question. But even maybe in a way more importantly, the individual themselves won't be able to rely on themselves to make decisions, which no matter how many things I could tell them, let's say in a given week, in a given session, I always constantly tell them what to do. They're still going to have to make thousands and thousands of decisions on their own that they'll have to rely on themselves to make. They won't have someone else there to make it for them. And that's good. But they won't have anyone else anyway. So they'll have to be able to trust themselves. So yes, there's the part you can even be wrong or give bad advice and all of that. But even bigger than that to me is this sense that you're taking away their agency and their ability to rely on themselves. And again, even you're telling them that they can't rely on themselves. So I think as a therapist, there sometimes is this urge at certain times with certain clients to tell them what to do or to give some more maybe stronger advice or nudge them in a certain way. That definitely can come up because yes, you try to be non-judgmental or have that stance or that mindset even, or internally feel that way. But we all have, you know, preferences. We all have our own hunches about things, or something might rub us the wrong way, or we're pretty sure something is right or wrong. Obviously therapists are still human beings, so if those things will come to your mind, but you do have to, except let's say in the most extreme of cases, and even their approach with caution. But we have to be mindful of reining that in and not pushing them a certain way, and definitely not telling them what they should do. So I've had this happen so many times where clients come in and they expect that. They say, okay, you're going to tell me what to do, or why aren't you telling me what to do, in my life, or making the decisions for me? And then we have to have a talk about why that's not what therapy is about and how that wouldn't actually serve them, especially in the long run. So it's really important to be aware of that. So as parents, it's tough because your kids are the most important thing to you, the thing that you care the most about, and they're delicate and fragile, of course, resilient as well, but they are, um, you know, whatever age they are, they're kids, they're small. And so you have this very strong sense of wanting to protect them. And so when you see them doing something that you think will possibly hurt them in some way, there's going to be this strong urge to want to intervene. But I really do appreciate the mindset of respecting a child uh, as a human being. Of course, I say they're the same as an adult, but they have a lot of agency, and you can trust them or give them that sense of respect, even from a very young age. I've been learning about some approach, and maybe I'll talk about it in an upcoming show. We're doing some classes with Kiana. I'll leave it at that. But anyway, one of the parts of the framework is respecting the child and trusting the child. So even when they're playing, trust them and give them some sense that they can figure it out on their own. And I've had that happen a lot with Keon. He's trying to reach something he can't, or he seems like he can't, or he's frustrated, or he wants me to help him. And there's a blurry line there of, when does he really need my help, and I should help him, and when is it important to give him some trust that he can figure it out on his own, and let him try to explore and figure out a way to solve the problem rather than coming in and solving it for him or trying to prevent every problem from even happening for him. So I think it could be really nice, and especially as kids become more verbal and can talk to you about things, to really give them agency and show them that you trust them, because I think that's a wonderful thing. Because there's all this stuff saying about uh, building your confidence in your decision making, your competence, your ability, the practice of going through it, the practice of dealing with the consequences and reflecting on what happened, what did you do right and wrong, and all of that. Those things are very important. But another reason why you can't make decisions for other people is you can't feel for other people. So, if you go to the restaurant and you say, "Oh, what should I eat?" Now, maybe I know some good things at this restaurant. I can give you some recommendations, but you know what you're feeling, how hungry you are, what you might be craving or wanting. What did you have recently? So maybe you want something different. There's so many things, or even with eating itself. You deal with kids and you're trying to feed your child to help them eat, and one of the things I think you want to be so careful about is not helping them maintain their ability to ask themselves and their body, what do they want? When am I full? Right? No one can tell you when you are full other than yourself. And sometimes, as parents, you think, okay, I have to keep feeding my kid, or oh, he always has this much of it, so he has to have this much again. Or he's trying to gain weight or lose weight or whatever it is, trying to do something if your baby's underweight or higher weight or whatever it is, we might think we have to control what they eat and other things that they do, but only they know what they are feeling, and we don't want them to lose touch with that. Something that I'll probably talk about more in, in the next segment as well. But that's such a critical piece of this whole puzzle, and why, as much as you might think you can make decisions for someone else or give them perfect advice, you really can't, because only they know what they want. So, where do you want to go on vacation? And how they might tell you what their options are. You can say, oh, I've been this place. I thought it was really nice, or this place kind of like this or that, or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, only they know what they want and what feels good to them. You can share some perspectives and some feedback, or, some guidance based on what you know, but they can only tell you what they want, or tell themselves what they want. And this is actually also why you have to be so careful when you ask other people for advice, because when you ask people for advice, as much as you think, of course, they're going to tell you what you should do for you, because we are in our own heads and we're having our own experience, most people tell you what they want for them, or they would want if they were in your situation, which is a good starting point, but it's definitely not complete, and it could definitely, push you the wrong way. So, someone who hates their job, you're like, "Oh, I'm thinking of maybe leaving my job and starting my own company." Like, oh yeah, for sure you should do that, because for them, it's their thought is like, "Oh, I hate my job. I wish I had some other opportunity. I wish I would leave my job." Where someone is happy in the relationship or unhappy in the relationship, that's going to affect the type of relationship advice they give you. So, you have to be very careful that when you ask people for advice, they might tell you something, and people are very different in how certain they'll be about the advice they give you, which is itself something, also my decision making, but also in the ways people give advice. There's a huge range of how much people tell you, how much unsolicited advice they give you, how strongly they give their advice, how confident they are, all those kinds of things. And so sometimes you'll get some very confident sounding um, advice from someone, that makes it seem so certain and so clear that, oh, they're so clear about it, then that I'm so unsure. So I should do what they say because I don't know, and it seems like they know. But we have to be careful that sometimes people just give very certain advice just because that's how they are, and they're often giving what's the best advice for them, what they would do in your shoes, but that's for them. You know, you have to do what's best for you. You're in your own shoes, and you have to make that best decision for yourself. So a big part of making decisions is checking in with ourselves. Yes, we want to think about things. We also want to be aware of our gut instinct, and not just our gut instinct, but our feelings that are there. And only we can feel our feelings. No one else can do that for us. So only we can be in touch with that very huge and critical aspect of any decision making, which is what are our own feelings, preferences, wants, needs, things we don't want, things that don't matter to us, things that don't matter as much to us. That's only something you can know and be in touch with. And so no one can make the decision for you because they can't know what those things are. So let's go to our last commercial break. And in the last segment, I'll talk a bit more about making decisions, some things I think do matter and things that can get us into trouble at times. But we'll talk a bit more about decision making in the last segment. We'll be right back. Including the show on decision making. Um, so looking at yourself as a decision maker, how easy or hard it is for you. And throughout the show, I've talked about various aspects of decision making, from how much we trust ourselves to how hard we can be on ourselves if we potentially are wrong, to how much we might have doubt or lack of doubt, um, and things of that sort. And I mentioned something earlier in the show about not getting too attached to results and focusing more on process. And so this is like all things, not black or white. It doesn't mean results don't matter. Of course they do. So you don't want to ignore the results, because if you keep getting bad results from certain decisions you're making, you might want to pay attention to how you're making those decisions. Something that came to my mind is, if you're uh, dating and you keep picking the wrong kinds of people, you keep having bad relationships, as maybe that's how it seems to you, you might want to focus on, okay, maybe I'm choosing the wrong people. So you do want to notice the results, obviously, and see how they're going. So obviously results matter, and you pay attention to them. And it depends on what we're talking about. Some things, the results are more straightforward, that if you're getting bad results, you're making bad decisions, but slightly a little bit more complex than that. And so that's why I think it is also very important to focus on your decision making process, not just the results. So let's say you make a decision, and then the results come in for whatever that decision is. You want to be a bit cautious of how much you want to jump to a conclusion based on just what the results are. I don't know if you're familiar with poker, let's say a no limit Texas Hold'em, you can go all in with a bad hand and get lucky. And so if you just look at how you won money on that hand, you're like, oh, that was really good. But if you look at the decision you made, it might have been a bad decision, a decision that most of the time won't work in your favor, and you'll be losing all your money. So sometimes in life that might happen, where you make a bad decision and you get lucky, and you might realize that, oh yeah, I didn't show up to the meeting, and I didn't tell anybody that I wasn't going to be there, but it turned out the meeting got canceled anyway. So I saved myself from writing the email saying I won't be coming, and the meeting got canceled anyway, and like it's a good thing. So it could look like a good thing when let's say you didn't send the email that probably is like the professional thing to do, to say you're not going to make it to the meeting. But you got lucky and things actually worked out. And maybe, yeah, it is a little bit better that you don't have to say you didn't weren't going to be at the meeting, and you're just off the hook. But you hopefully wouldn't take that to mean, oh, that's a good thing to do. That, whenever you are not going to make it to a meeting, just don't say anything and cross your fingers that it gets canceled. Because most of the times that won't happen, and then you're going to just deal with the aftermath, whatever what that might be. So it is important to look at, even when you look at the results, I think, did I possibly get lucky here, or did this go the way one would expect? Things obviously aren't going to be 100% predictable. That's why decisions are hard. But what do I think about how things turned out? Not just looking at, if it's a win, that means I did everything right. And if it's a loss, sometimes you get unlucky. Sometimes you make a really good decision and things still go bad. Using the poker analogy, the same thing. The person on the other end who went all in with the better hand and they lost, they made a good decision. The result might be bad in that instance, but in the long run, that they made a good decision, and that will be good for them. So we want to be careful about getting too attached to the results, because sometimes you make what you can realize is a bad decision and it goes well, and sometimes you make a good decision and it goes poorly. And also, looking at that, you might look at your process, and maybe you have a good process and it still goes bad, or you have a bad process and it goes well. So I do think we have to be careful not to get too attached and fixated on the results, especially depending on what we're talking about, because sometimes that can mislead us. I've talked about sports on some recent shows. I'm a big sports fan. Sometimes you see a team gets kind of lucky in a game that they might win, and sometimes a team might get unlucky in a game that they lose. And so sometimes they think, okay, well, if you lose, you should look at everything you did was wrong, or it could feel that way. So you have to learn what you did wrong to do it differently. And if you win, you look at, okay, what did I do right? Because I got to do that again. But I always think no matter what the game is, you hopefully, if you're being honest with yourself, going to see good and bad. So you won the game, but also there was mistakes you made or things you could have done better or things you got lucky that might not happen again. You want to be aware of it. And so as you lose, and yes, you probably did some things wrong that you could do better, but you also likely did a lot of right things too. But we can sometimes get so colored by or our vision gets so colored by the results that we think that the win means all good and the loss means all bad, but it's way more complicated than that. So I do think we want to be kind of mindful of how we interpret the results and decisions that we make. But we want to go back to what I was saying, I think focusing on the process even more than just the results. How did I make this decision? Did I, take the good amount of time, which is, goes both ways? Did I act in a timely manner in the sense that I didn't rush things, but also did I wait too long? Because you could do both. And so saying not deciding or not making an active decision is itself a decision. So if you have some kind of illness and the doctor gives you two treatment options and you say, well, I want to think it over, we have to also be aware that the longer you think or the amount of time you spend thinking and not making one of those two decisions, that itself is obviously going to impact your outcome. If you have some illness that's getting worse and worse, if you wait, weeks and weeks and weeks, maybe the illness will be much worse, whatever treatment you choose. And your decision not to act or take action itself is something to think about. So that's definitely something to think about. How timely was your decision? How do you think you did as far as how much time you gave based on the circumstances, based on how important of a decision it was, all sorts of factors. Because yes, what you choose to eat is different than, let's say, choosing, two different treatment options for let's say a life-threatening illness, right? It should take you longer to make that second decision. And then related to that, how did I or who did I talk to? How did I come about getting this from outside sources? Did I get some support? So yes, if it's a medical procedure, possibly getting a second opinion, seeing another doctor, talking to other physicians and getting their input. Maybe talking to patients who have gone through it as well, if you have some kind of access or know how you can find that. So based on the type of decision and how important it is, it might make sense to consult with some other people. And do I feel like I did a good job in how much outside resources I sought out? Also, doing your own research, let's say online or, through books or whatever other forums or, means that you have. How much did I, look at external sources or external resources to help me in making that decision? And that goes both ways, like not enough, too much. As I was saying before, maybe did you lean too heavily on other people? You asked someone because you wanted to just do whatever they said, or you didn't want to have to make the decision on your own. So that's something important. Which brings me to the next one, which is how much did I listen to myself? How much did you really reflect? How much did you really try to get in touch with what you were feeling and thinking inside? It might seem like, that's obviously going to be part of the process, and it almost always will be at some level, but how much we listen to that, how much we try to connect with what we're feeling, thinking about the issue, um, there's a huge range of what we do there. And how much do we give value to that? I realize I really care about this, and I want to give that a lot of value, which is part of this next point of how much confidence did you give yourself in making the decision? How much did you uh, have doubts, and how much did you listen to those doubts is another aspect of it. And this is something that's not absolute. To me, most big decisions in life don't get to 100% confidence where you feel totally confident, unless it's sometimes a very easy one. You have to do something very important, but the choices are clear. But most big decisions in life won't feel that absolute, which is kind of scary because it's the things that you care about the most, but you're going to feel a little bit uneasy when you make the decision because you won't have absolute certainty. But I think if we can recognize that, that can help us a bit, because sometimes when it's time to make the decision, as I was saying before, we might sometimes be, delaying that and be passive because we might not feel sure about it. It's like, this is so big. And if I don't feel 100% certain, how can I make a decision? But when we recognize that 100% certainty is likely not going to happen for this type of decision, that might make us feel more ready to make the decision, because there isn't some sense that can only make this decision when I have 100% confidence. You might realize that's not going to happen. So I think that's a really big thing I see with a lot of my clients, and helping them, make decisions. And I hope I'm aware of making sure it's them making a decision, not me at any level. Is that as I try to bring this into their awareness that they might be unsure, but part of that uncertainty might not be that they don't know what to do. It's that it's the nature of the decision they have to make, that it just won't feel good either way, or totally good either way. And all they could do is go with their best decision, but it's not going to feel like a perfect decision, or it's not going to feel like it can't be wrong, or they know it for sure, and that's tough. But I think that is a big part of life. As I was saying, not making a decision or not making an active decision is a decision itself. And so life is constantly, whether you look at it as a series of decisions or not, we're constantly being bombarded with different decisions to make. And we have to make them almost all without absolute confidence or certainty. But we have to, because if we don't make decisions, that itself would be a decision not to act. So, you're dating someone and you're not sure if you should marry them. But you say, well, I'm still not sure yet, so let me wait. But the longer you wait, first of all, they might not want to be with you anymore, if they're looking for that commitment and feel like you have, cold feet, or you're just leading them on. But even in another way, you have less and less time together if you keep waiting, or, let's say to have kids. That's actually one that I've seen with a lot of couples, where they do what I was talking about before, that they might think about it, talk about it, and almost wait till it's too late, and that the decision is essentially made for them, or they no longer have a choice to make, because let's say they no longer can get pregnant if they don't consider other options or want to consider other options. The decision is made for them. And to me, that's really unfortunate, because you can end up with a lot of regret when you do that you didn't give yourself the opportunity to make the decision for yourself. You kind of went back and forth, and let the decision be made for you by external factors like time, or the options no longer being available, or at least one of the options not being available anymore. And I think that can be really, really unfortunate. So it's tough. We have to accept that most of the big decisions in life will leave us feeling a little bit uncertain. And it doesn't mean we're making the wrong decision. It just means these types of decisions will feel that way. So you'll make it, and you might feel very uneasy. But going back to what I was saying before, if we also recognize that these decisions are this way, they're not easy, they're not black and white, it might help us if we really acknowledge that, and internalize that, to not be so hard on ourselves if if things go wrong, or we get it wrong, or we don't like how things turn out. We often make a very good decision but get a bad result. That's what I was talking about. Process over the results is sometimes things don't go your way, or maybe whatever you would have done, it would have gone bad. But all you can do is do the best you can in making your decision. And so today I just really scratched the surface on some of these different aspects of decision making, but just wanted to share some thoughts, ideas. I might continue on these themes in later shows, because I think decision making is such a big part of life, important part of life, and one that most of us struggle with in one way or the other. So that brings us to the end of tonight's show. A big thank you to Ghazaleh in the studio. You've been listening to In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee, free Iran.